When you stop overgmng, the avoidant finally notices everything. You know what's interesting. Sometimes we think giving more is the answer. We try harder, we show up more, we text first. We plan the dates. We become emotionally fluent for two people. And the irony, the more we give, the more invisible we become to the avoidant person we're trying to win over. Here's the truth. Overgiving doesn't make someone love you. It makes them comfortable. Comfortable with doing less. Comfortable with emotional distance. Comfortable with not meeting your needs. But the moment you stop, not out of punishment, not out of games, but out of respect for yourself, everything changes. You create space. You stop chasing validation and you start owning your value. That's when the avoidant notices not just your absence, but the presence of something they were taking for granted. It's not about being cold. It's about being clear. I'm not here to fill all the gaps you won't step into. I'm not going to love you so loudly that you never have to speak. And if someone only realizes your worth after you stop overgiving, that's a sign, not necessarily that you should go back, but that you were giving from the wrong place all along. Give from your strength, not your fear. And watch what happens when you no longer carry the emotional weight for 2.W. We often believe that love is shown through action, through how much we give, how often we show up, and how tirelessly we care. So when someone we're dating feels distant, inconsistent, or avoidant, our instinct is to close that gap with effort. We lean in, we initiate more, we become hyper-attuned to their moods, we listen without ever really being heard ourselves. We think, if I just give a little more, maybe they'll feel safe enough to come closer. But here's the hard truth. Overgiving doesn't make you more seen. It often makes you more invisible. When you're constantly stepping in to maintain the emotional connection, you unintentionally create a dynamic where your presence is expected rather than appreciated. The avoidant partner gets used to your emotional labor. They don't have to stretch. They don't have to initiate. They don't have to be vulnerable. You've taken on both roles, giver and receiver. And in doing so, they no longer feel the need to fully show up. This isn't about blame, it's about balance. Relationships are like a dance, and if one person is doing all the steps, the other doesn't need to learn the rhythm. You think you're building intimacy, but you're actually carrying the relationship on your back. You're doing all the work, hoping they'll eventually meet you halfway, but they're not being asked to. Why would they notice something they never had to earn in the first place? The more you give without receiving, the more exhausted you feel. You start shrinking. You become quieter about your needs. You rationalize their silence or their absence. You convince yourself they're just bad at expressing emotions or that you're too sensitive. You adapt to their detachment in hopes that they'll eventually value your consistency. But it doesn't happen. And what's worse, the avoidant person doesn't see the sacrifice. They just see someone who's always there. Someone who keeps showing up no matter what they give in return. Your love becomes background noise, not because it lacks value, but because it lacks contrast. There's no moment of pause where they're asked to reflect on what you bring. There's no space for them to miss you, to notice the emotional weight you've been carrying all along. Overgiving doesn't invite gratitude, it conditions expectation. It tells the other person, I'll handle this for both of us. And once that pattern is set, your worth gets filtered through utility rather than emotional presence. You're not seen as a partner, they start seeing you as a provider of comfort, availability, and reassurance, all on demand. And here's the kicker, the more you give from that place of fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, the more you betray yourself. And every time you do, your self-worth takes a quiet hit. Until one day you don't recognize yourself anymore. You've molded yourself to their emotional limits, and in doing so, you become unrecognizable to your own. Overgiving doesn't create connection. It erodes it slowly, silently, and with the best intentions. There's a huge difference between shutting down and setting a boundary. When you stop overgiving, you're not withdrawing love, you're reclaiming your dignity. You're saying, I matter too. For many people, especially those who are used to giving endlessly in relationships, that shift can feel unnatural at first. It can even feel harsh, but it's not cruelty, it's clarity. The truth is, we often confuse love with effort. We believe that proving our value means showing up over and over, even when it's one-sided. We think if we just love harder, are more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, the other person will see our worth and finally meet us halfway. But that kind of giving, when it's not reciprocated, stops being a gift and becomes a transaction, one where you're always paying but never receiving anything back. Choosing to stop overgiving isn't about punishing the other person. You're not playing a game or trying to manipulate them into chasing you. That mindset comes from fear and insecurity. What you're doing is stepping back to observe what happens when you're no longer the one holding the entire relationship together. You're creating space for truth to show up. You're asking, if I stop carrying all the emotional weight, will they carry any at all? That's a powerful shift. It takes courage to stop doing what's familiar, especially when what's familiar feels like love. But you have to remember, love isn't proven through exhaustion. Your emotional labor shouldn't be the glue that holds a connection together. Real love feels mutual. It requires both people to invest, to risk, to show up not just physically but emotionally. When you stop overgiving, you stop enabling passivity. You allow space for the other person to reveal who they really are when they're no longer being rescued from doing the work. You might worry that by pulling back, you'll lose them. That's the fear that keeps most people stuck in these one-sided dynamics. But if the only thing keeping someone around is your over-functioning, then they're not choosing you, they're choosing the version of the relationship that benefits them without asking much in return. That's not love, that's imbalance. By setting this boundary, not through anger or bitterness, but through calm and self-respect, you redefine the relationship dynamic. You communicate without words that your needs matter, that you're not available for a relationship where your worth is tied solely to how much you can give. This doesn't make you unkind or cold, it makes you emotionally mature, because real intimacy requires boundaries. And love without boundaries isn't love, it's sacrifice disguised disconnection. So when you stop overgiving, what you're actually doing is coming back home to yourself. You're no longer outsourcing your value to someone else's attention or affection. You're standing still and saying, if you want to be buying this with me, then meet me here. Not behind me, not ahead of me, right here, as equals. And that's not harsh, it's honest. It's not rejection, it's self-respect. When you've been the one constantly giving in a relationship, offering love, reassurance, presence, and effort, it can be confusing to realize that all of it might be going unnoticed. Especially when you're dealing with someone avoidant. These are the people who pull away when things get too close, who keep a protective emotional distance, who seem present but unavailable at the same time. You might wonder, how can they not see how much I'm doing? How can they not feel this connection? But the truth is, some people don't see clearly until the noise stops. When you're always reaching out, always trying to make things work, always smoothing the path for both of you, there's no silence, there's no stillness. And in that absence of space, there's no reflection. The avoidant never has to stop and consider what you bring to the table because you never give them a reason to. You're always right there, emotionally available, consistently present, and endlessly understanding. But the moment you stop when you step back, not in anger, but in truth, something changes. The avoidant person is forced to notice, not because you're trying to provoke them, but because the emotional oxygen you've been supplying disappears. And in that quiet, they're left alone with the reality of the space you once filled. They begin to feel what they couldn't see before. Avoidants often operate from a place of fear. Intimacy feels overwhelming, so they build emotional walls. But as long as you're doing all the emotional heavy lifting, they never have to question those walls. You allow them to keep their distance without consequence. When you stop overgiving, you disrupt that pattern. You introduce tension into their comfort zone, and with that tension comes awareness. They may not have realized how deeply your presence affected them until it's no longer freely given. It's in your absence that they begin to reflect on your consistency, on your care, on your emotional availability. They may feel the disconnection, the sudden void where your presence used to be. And for the first time, they're faced with the possibility of losing something they thought would always be there. Not because you're playing games, but because you've reclaimed your energy. You've stopped proving and started observing. This isn't a magic trick. Stepping back doesn't guarantee they'll come running. It doesn't mean they'll suddenly transform into someone who can meet your emotional needs. But what it does do is bring clarity to both of you. You see how they respond without the comfort of your overgiving. They see what it actually means to be without you. And that moment of clarity, while sometimes painful, is deeply revealing. The avoidant finally notices not because you shouted louder, but because you finally went quiet. They notice not because you pushed harder, but because you stopped pushing altogether. And in that stillness, in that brave space you've created by stepping back, they are left with the undeniable truth of who you were and what they never fully acknowledged while you were right in front of them. Every relationship you're in teaches people how to treat you, not through your words, but through your actions, through what you accept, what you tolerate, and what you give without boundaries. When you overgive, especially to someone emotionally unavailable, you may think you're being generous, loving, or deeply supportive. But what you're actually doing is setting the tone. This is how much I will give, even if it's not returned. This is how little I require to stay. And whether you realize it or not, that message becomes a blueprint for how the relationship will unfold. If you consistently respond to distance with closeness, silence with effort, or emotional withdrawal with more reassurance, you teach the other person that you will compensate for their lack. They don't have to step up because you'll fill in the gaps. They don't have to initiate vulnerability because you'll do the emotional labor for both of you. You may think this is creating intimacy, but in reality, it's creating imbalance. And imbalance, no matter how lovingly it's presented, always leads to resentment. People don't change when they're comfortable. They change when the dynamic shifts when they are asked, even silently, to meet you where you are, not just receive what you're constantly offering. By continuing to overgive, you keep the avoidant in a passive role. They're not challenged to reflect, to engage emotionally, or to invest more because they've never had to. You've taught them that love means giving without expectation, showing up without reciprocation, and staying even when your needs go unmet. But when you stop, when you create a boundary and say, I'm not available for this dynamic anymore, you shift the energy. And that shift forces people to pay attention. It's not a threat. It's not a game. It's a decision to no longer accept less than what you give. You are no longer willing to be the emotional foundation for someone who only contributes when it's convenient. And in doing so, you give them a chance to step up or step out. This isn't just about romantic relationships, it's about self-respect. You begin to model a new standard, not just for others, but for yourself. You remind yourself that your needs matter. That love should be mutual, not performative. That showing up for someone else doesn't mean disappearing for yourself. You're teaching others and yourself that you are not a placeholder for someone else's emotional growth. And yes, some people may walk away when you stop overgiving, but let them, because the ones who truly value you, who are capable of meeting you in a healthy, reciprocal space, won't just appreciate your presence, they'll mirror your effort. They'll listen, initiate, care, and grow alongside you. But that only becomes possible when you stop carrying the weight for both people. You teach people how to treat you by the standards you enforce, not the love you overextend. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for them is to stop overgiving and see who they become when they're finally asked again. True giving in a relationship isn't about fear, it's about strength. It's not about grasping desperately to hold on, hoping that if you give enough, love will stick. It's about a confident, grounded generosity that flows freely from a place of self-worth and emotional security. When you give because you fear losing someone, or because you doubt your own value, the giving becomes desperate, and that desperation is palpable. It sends a message of neediness rather than abundance. It's not attractive, it's draining. Giving from fear creates imbalance. You overextend yourself emotionally, physically, or mentally, trying to fill a void that only your own self-acceptance can fill. Instead of creating connection, it creates codependency. You lose sight of your boundaries and your needs, and you become someone else's emotional caretaker rather than their equal partner. The relationship starts to feel exhausting because it is exhausting. It becomes a one-sided performance where your love is conditional on keeping the other person close, rather than a mutual exchange of respect and care. When you give from strength, however, everything shifts. Giving from strength means you know your worth, even if the other person doesn't recognize it. You don't give because you need something back, but because you want to share something valuable that you have plenty of inside yourself. You're generous without depletion. You're kind without self-sacrifice. You love without losing yourself. This kind of giving invites balance. It sets a tone for the relationship that says, I am whole on my own, and I choose to share this wholeness with you. It encourages the other person to meet you there, to bring their own strength and generosity to the table. When you give from strength, you create space for genuine reciprocity. You're not holding your breath, waiting for them to finally get it. You're confident in what you offer and clear about what you deserve. Giving from fear is often rooted in insecurity, fear of abandonment, fear of being unlovable, or fear of being alone. Those fears drive you to give beyond your limits, to tolerate less than you deserve, and to settle for relationships that don't truly nourish you. It's exhausting because it's a constant battle against your own doubts. You're trying to fix what can't be fixed by effort alone. But when you give from strength, you release those fears. You stop trying to control the relationship through overgiving. You stop hoping your actions will make someone love you more or stay longer. Instead, you trust that real love comes naturally when two whole people choose to share their lives. You become less attached to outcomes and more connected to your own truth. This shift in mindset changes everything. It frees you from the need to perform or prove your worth. It allows you to show up fully without losing yourself. It creates healthier boundaries because you're not giving from a place of emptiness, but from abundance. And in doing so, you naturally attract people who are ready and able to meet you with the same level of respect and care. So true giving isn't about how much you can give or how often you can sacrifice. It's about the quality and intention behind your giving. It's about giving from a place of confidence, love, and self-respect. When you give from strength, you don't lose yourself, you find yourself. And that's when love becomes a shared journey, not a one-sided struggle. Thank you so much for listening and being open to this message. I hope it helps you see the power you already have inside you and encourages you to honor your own worth in every relationship. Take care of yourself first and watch how everything else shifts around you. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and know that you deserve love that meets you halfway. Thank you, and goodbye.